the Shadowed Glade. The soft hum of night settled over the verdant wild forest, the air thick with magic and the scent of pine. Razel Ironhorn adjusted his axe on his back as they moved through the narrow path. Towering trees loomed above them, their branches entwining like skeletal fingers blocking the moonlight. The only light came from tiny fireflies flitting around them, glowing with a soft blue hue. Beside him, Bard Putamus twirled his jade flute between his fingers. His white hair seemed to catch every trace of light, and his grey skin blended into the shadows, giving him an almost ghostly appearance. Razel, Bard said with a wry grin, tell me again why we're walking through a cursed forest in the middle of the night. Because, Razel rumbled, his deep voice steady. Someone thought it was a good idea to take the shortcut. Wasn't that you? Bard paused dramatically, placing a hand over his chest. Me? Never. I was merely encouraging efficient travel. Not my fault the trees have a vendetta against us. Razel shot him a glance, but said nothing, his crimson skin glowing faintly in the eerie light. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the woods. Razel's hand flew to his axe, and Bard instinctively raised his flute. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged, a twisted amalgamation of roots and vines, its eyes glowing green with ancient magic. Looks like we have company, Razel growled. Lovely. I've always wanted to meet a tree that can punch back, Bard muttered, bringing his flute to his lips. The creature lunged, its vine-like arms whipping toward them. Razel leapt forward, his axe slicing through the air. The blade bit into the creature's bark-like skin, but it barely flinched. Vines writhed and reformed, twisting around Razel's weapon and yanking it from his grip. Bard? A little help here. Bard stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he played a quick, haunting melody. The jade flute shimmered, and a wave of magic burst forth. The creature faltered, its movements slowing as Bard's music took hold. Sleep, little monster, sleep, Bard sang softly, weaving his magic into the tune. The creature's glowing eyes dimmed, its body sagging as it succumbed to the spell. Razel yanked his axe free, breathing heavily. Nice work, Razel said, brushing dirt off his battle-worn armor. Didn't think your flute was good for more than tavern songs. I'm a man of many talents, Bard said, tucking the flute into his belt. Speaking of talents, shall we celebrate our victory with a little? A distant howl cut him off. It echoed through the trees, long and mournful. Razel stiffened. Worgs, more than one. Bard's humor faded. Let's hope they're not hungry. They broke into a jog, their footsteps muffled by the forest floor. The howls grew louder, closer. A glimmer of light appeared ahead, a clearing. They burst into it, their breath misting in the cool air. The moon hung above them, casting a silvery glow over the clearing. All right, Razel said, turning to face the darkened forest. We make our stand here. Bard nodded, drawing his sword for the first time in days. Right behind you, my friend. The first Wurg emerged, its eyes gleaming like twin embers. It was followed by two more, their shaggy black fur blending into the night. Their growls rumbled like distant thunder as they circled. Come on, you mangy beasts, Razel roared, pounding his chest. You think you can take us? The lead Wurg lunged, but Razel was faster. His axe flashed in the moonlight, striking true. The creature collapsed in a heap, and Bard leapt forward, his sword cutting a graceful arc through the air, driving the other two back. The Wurgs snarled but retreated into the shadows, their eyes watching from the darkness before disappearing entirely. The forest fell silent once more. Not bad, Bard said, sheathing his sword. We're getting pretty good at this monster-slaying business. Razel chuckled, wiping his blade clean. Yeah, not bad for a couple of misfits. They stood there for a moment, catching their breath. The fireflies returned, casting their soft light around them. Bard stretched his arms, cracking his neck. You know, Bard said, we could probably make a fortune writing a ballad about this. The tale of the tiefling duo, a grand adventure filled with danger, heroism, and moderately sized wargs. Moderately sized? Razel raised an eyebrow. Those things were huge. Bard shrugged. Artistic license. Razel shook his head, but a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Come on, Tholdrak's not far now. Maybe they'll have a warm bed and a cold drink waiting for us, and a tavern full of people who need to hear the story of two unlikely heroes. Bard said, I like the sound of that. They turned back to the path, their footsteps fading into the night as the forest watched them go. The Shadowed Glade, Part 2. The silence of the forest grew heavier as Razel and Bard resumed their trek. Though the wargs had vanished, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air, like unseen eyes tracking their every move. We should be close, Razel said, his voice low but steady. Tholdrak can't be more than a day's walk from here. Bard nodded, wiping his brow. Let's hope we get there before something else decides to snack on us. As they moved deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in around them, their bark twisted into strange faces that seemed to leer in the faint moonlight. The soft glow of the fireflies dimmed, and an unnatural chill settled over the forest floor. Bard slowed, his hand instinctively reaching for his flute. Do you feel that? Something's wrong. Razel tightened his grip on his axe. Stay close and keep your flute ready. They pressed on, the path narrowing into a tunnel of gnarled roots and hanging moss. Then, without warning, the ground beneath Razel's feet gave way. Razel! Bard lunged, but it was too late. The crimson-skinned warrior disappeared into the earth, swallowed by the dark. Bard dropped to his knees at the edge of the pit, peering down. Razel, are you alive down there? A muffled voice rose from the shadows. Yeah, mostly. But you're not gonna like what I found. With a sigh, Bard secured a rope from his pack and tied it to a nearby tree. He descended carefully, his boots scraping against the rough earthen walls. The pit opened into a hidden cavern, its walls covered in ancient carvings glowing faintly with green light. Razel stood in the center, brushing dirt from his beard. Look at this. He pointed to a stone altar at the far end of the cavern. Upon it lay a small, ornate box carved from obsidian, its surface etched with strange symbols. The air around it shimmered with magic. That's ominous, Bard muttered, stepping closer. You think it's a treasure or a trap? Razel grunted. In my experience, it's usually both. Bard ran a finger along one of the glowing carvings. These symbols, they're old. Older than anything I've seen before. This isn't ordinary magic. Before Razel could respond, the ground began to tremble. The carvings flared brighter, and a deep, echoing voice filled the cavern. Who dares disturb the resting place of the Nightbound? Razel and Bard exchanged a glance. Nightbound, Bard whispered. That sounds bad. A figure began to coalesce from the green light, a towering phantom clad in shadowy armor, its eyes burning with emerald fire. It raised a spectral blade, pointing it at them. Leave this place, or be cursed for all eternity. Razel hefted his axe. I don't like being told where I can't go. Bard raised his flute. And I don't like being cursed. Let's call this a disagreement. The phantom lunged, its sword slicing through the air. Razel met it with a roar, his axe clashing against the spectral blade in a burst of sparks. Bard played a rapid, chaotic tune, weaving magic into his song. The cavern trembled, the symbols flickering in response. I hope you have a plan, Razel shouted, deflecting another strike. Working on it, Bard called back. His fingers danced across the flute, drawing out a haunting melody. The symbols on the walls began to swirl and shift, their light intensifying until it filled the cavern. The phantom froze, its form unraveling as the magic surged around it. This is not over. With a final ear-splitting roar, the phantom dissolved into a burst of green light, leaving only the eerie glow of the carvings behind. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Razel lowered his axe, breathing hard. Well, that was different. Bard walked to the obsidian box, his eyes narrowing. If that thing was guarding this, it must be important. He reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the box. It felt warm, almost alive. With a soft click, the lid popped open. Inside was a single black gemstone, pulsing faintly with a deep crimson light. Razel frowned. "What is it?" "I'm not sure," Bard admitted, holding it up. The light from the stone reflected in his eyes. "But I think it just changed our plans." The Shadowed Glade, Part 3. The black gemstone pulsed in Bard's hand, its glow like a heartbeat, slow, steady, and ominous. It sent a strange warmth up his arm, and for a moment, he felt as though it was whispering to him in a language just beyond understanding. "That thing feels wrong," Razel said, narrowing his eyes. "Put it back. Leave it here." Bard hesitated. He couldn't explain it, but something about the gemstone felt familiar, almost comforting. Still, Razel's instincts had saved their lives more than once. He gave a reluctant nod and placed the stone back in the box. The moment it touched the obsidian, the glow vanished, and the cavern seemed to exhale, the magic dissipating into the still air. "Let's get out of here," Razel said, scanning the shadows. "I don't trust this place to stay quiet for long." They climbed back out of the pit and resumed their journey. The forest felt lighter somehow, as though a great weight had lifted. Even the fireflies returned, their soft blue light flickering like tiny lanterns guiding them forward. By dawn, the trees began to thin, and the towering walls of Thaldrak rose in the distance. The city stood at the edge of the forest, its stone battlements gleaming in the early morning light. "Finally," Razel said, rolling his shoulders. "A real bed, a hot meal, maybe even a festival." Bard raised an eyebrow. "Festivals have a habit of turning into trouble around us." "True," Razel chuckled, "but maybe we'll get lucky." They approached the gates where a pair of guards stood at attention. One of them, a young man with a nervous expression, stepped forward. "Travelers," the guard said, eyeing them warily. "You've arrived just in time. The Festival of the Ancients begins tonight." Bard shot Razel a knowing glance. "See? I told you. Trouble." Razel ignored him. "We're looking for a place to rest and a decent tavern. Any recommendations?" The guard nodded. "The Drunken Wyvern, best ale in the city." He lowered his voice. "But be careful. Strange things have been happening lately, people disappearing, shadows moving in places they shouldn't." "Thanks for the warning," Razel said, clapping the guard on the shoulder. As they entered the city, Bard couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. His hand brushed against his belt, where the weight of the obsidian box felt heavier than it should. Later that night, the Drunken Wyvern was alive with music and laughter. Tables were packed with revelers celebrating the start of the Festival of the Ancients. Razel and Bard sat at a corner table, a jug of ale between them. "Now this," Razel said, raising his mug, "is what I've been waiting for." Bard grinned. "A bard's paradise. Music, stories, and an audience that's just drunk enough to love every song I play." He pulled out his flute and gave a playful trill. But before he could begin his performance, the doors to the tavern burst open. A woman in a tattered cloak stumbled inside, her eyes wide with terror. "Help!" she cried. "The shadows! They took him! They took my son!" The room fell silent. Razel and Bard exchanged a glance. "Looks like the trouble found us," Bard muttered, finishing his drink. "Shall we?" Razel stood, his eyes already scanning the room for answers. "We came to rest, but I guess saving the city works too." The woman collapsed into a chair, gasping for breath. They came from the forest, black shadows with burning eyes. They dragged him into the old ruins outside the city." Bard's face darkened. "The same direction as the cavern," Razel nodded grimly. "Looks like we didn't leave that stone behind after all." The descent into darkness. The moon was high when Razel Ironhorn and Bard Putamus left the safety of Thaldrak. following the frantic woman's directions toward the ancient ruins of Merville, an old fortress long abandoned and consumed by the forest. The ruins stood at the edge of a craggy hill, cloaked in shadow, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and stone. Razel gripped his axe tightly. If this is connected to what we found in the cavern, we'll need to be ready for anything. Bard nodded, the obsidian box weighing heavily in his pack. I have a feeling that stone isn't done with us yet. They stepped inside the crumbling archway, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls. Ancient murals adorned the walls, depicting battles between shadowy figures and armored warriors, their faces worn away by time. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to hum with magic. At the center of the ruins they found a vast circular chamber. A faint crimson light pulsed from the far side of the room, the same light as the gemstone. In the center of the light stood a robed figure, his back to them. His voice was cold and commanding, like steel wrapped in silk. Ah, Razel Ironhorn, Bard Putimus. I've been expecting you. The figure turned, revealing a pale, gaunt face beneath his hood. His eyes burned with dark magic, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. Lord Voldrick. You've come a long way, Voldrick said, his voice echoing in the chamber. Farther than I expected, but you've always been persistent. His eyes flicked to the obsidian box on Bard's hip. And now, you've brought me exactly what I need. Razel growled, stepping forward. Voldrick, I should have known you were behind this. Of course, Voldrick said, spreading his arms. Who else? The gemstone you found is no mere trinket, it is a key. One of the last remnants of an ancient power that once ruled this land. With it, I will awaken that power, and nothing will stand in my way. You've already done enough damage, Bard said, his voice low and steady. His hand tightened around his flute. We're not letting you take this city or anyone else. Voldrick laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You think you can stop me? You couldn't even stop me before. Do you remember, Bard, how helpless you were when I took everything from you? Bard's jaw tightened. His fingers trembled for a brief second before steadying. I remember, and I remember how it ended for your men when Razel found me. It'll end the same for you. Bold, Voldrick said. Foolish, but bold. He raised a hand and shadows coalesced around him, taking the shape of monstrous figures with glowing eyes. Razel glanced at Bard. Same plan as always? Hit hard, hit fast? Bard grinned. Works every time. The shadow creatures lunged. Razel met them head-on, his axe flashing as it cleaved through the dark forms. Bard raised his flute and played a sharp, discordant melody. The shadows writhed in pain, their forms unraveling under the force of his magic. Voldrick watched them with a cold, calculating gaze. He raised the gemstone from the box, its crimson light growing brighter with each passing second. You can't stop what's coming, he said. This is only the beginning. The ground shook violently, cracks spreading across the stone floor. A surge of crimson light shot toward the ceiling, tearing through the ancient stonework and opening a rift in the sky. Razel cursed under his breath. He's trying to open a portal. Bard's melody shifted, his magic wrapping around the rift like invisible chains, holding it back. Not if we stop him first. Razel charged, his axe raised high. Voldrick turned to meet him, his hand crackling with dark energy. The two clashed in a burst of light and shadow, their strength evenly matched. Bard, Razel shouted, holding Voldrick back. The gemstone, destroy it! Bard hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He sprinted toward the glowing stone, dodging the remaining shadow creatures. With a flourish, he brought his flute down on the gemstone, channeling all his magic into the strike. The gemstone shattered, its light exploding outward in a wave of pure energy. The shadows screamed and disintegrated, and the portal above collapsed in on itself. Voldrick staggered, his power fading. He glared at them with pure hatred. You've won, this time. But you can't stop what's coming. The Dragon Queen's brood will rise again, and when they do, no one will be safe. Before they could strike him down, Voldrik dissolved into shadows, vanishing into the cracks of the ruins. Aftermath. The ruins were silent once more, save for the soft sound of crumbling stone. Razel and Bard stood in the aftermath, catching their breath. "You know," Bard said, wiping sweat from his brow, "I thought that gemstone would be harder to break." Razel chuckled, resting his axe on his shoulder. "You hit it pretty hard." Bard smiled, but his expression quickly turned serious. "Voldrik's still out there, and whatever this Dragon Queen's brood is, it sounds like we haven't seen the worst of it yet." Razel nodded. "Then we find him, and we finish what we started." The two tieflings turned back toward Thaldrak, the first rays of dawn breaking over the forest. This fight was over, but the real battle had only just begun. Returned to Thaldrak the night before, Razel and Bard emerged from the ruins just as dawn's first light touched the tops of the trees. The forest, once oppressive and full of shadows, now seemed calm, almost serene. The weight of what had just transpired pressed heavily on their shoulders, but the path ahead was clear. "I hope that bought us some time," Bard said, his flute tucked safely into his belt. "Voldrik's still out there, and if what he said about the Dragon Queen's brood is true, we're going to need more than just the two of us." "We'll deal with him," Razel replied, his eyes scanning the treetops as they walked. "We've faced worse and lived to tell the tale. For now, we rest, regroup, and figure out our next move." He glanced at Bard with a grin, "and maybe have a drink or two." "Now that's a plan I can get behind," Bard said, his voice lighter for the first time since the battle. The trees thinned as they approached the outskirts of Thaldrak, its towering walls and iron gates coming into view. The guards at the gate straightened as they saw the two figures approach, one tall and elegant, the other short and formidable. "Travelers," the guard called, stepping forward with a wary expression. "You've arrived just in time. The Festival of the Ancients begins tonight." Bard shot Razel a knowing glance, his silver hair catching the morning light. "See? A festival. A perfect excuse to celebrate our survival," Razel smirked. "Or a perfect chance for more trouble to find you." As they passed through the gates, the weight of their journey momentarily lifting as they entered the bustling streets. The sounds of preparation for the festival filled the air, musicians tuning their instruments, vendors setting up their stalls, and colorful banners fluttering in the breeze. For the first time in days, the city felt alive, full of promise and possibility. "The Drunken Wyvern," Razel said, motioning toward a nearby street. "Best ale in the city, right?" "I think we've earned it." "More than earned it," Bard agreed, his eyes scanning the festive crowd. "And maybe while we're at it, we'll find out just how much Thaldrak knows about Voldrik and this Dragon Queen's brood. Someone here must have answers." "And if they don't," Razel said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation, "we'll make our own luck." They stepped into the bustling streets, their silhouettes disappearing into the throng of people. The city awaited, and with it, the next chapter of their adventure. The night before had begun, and beneath the celebration, shadows still lingered. But for now, Razel Ironhorn and Bard Putamus would enjoy the calm before the storm.